which is a public hearing. Do I assume that if you're here in the audience, you wish to make comments to the Planning Commission this evening? Okay. In the interest of time, will you keep your comments to 5 minutes or less, please? And what we will do is just give each person an opportunity to say what they want to say, and we're not going to respond. We may choose to ask a question for clarity, but there's no debate. You're not right, you're not wrong. We are just gathering your input.
Beginning of time. Time.
5.
Time to start.
When we start, okay, yes. At the close of the public hearing, there will be a discussion by the Planning Commission about the short-term room rental issue, and that is a discussion for us, the Planning Commission. You may listen, but you may not participate. So with that, I will open the public hearing on short-term room rentals at, can you see the clock?
6:35.
6:35, okay. And who would like to go first? Okay.
I'll start.
Can you give us your name, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My name is Jared Harris, and I own Inn at the Canyons here in Monticello, the former Days Inn. And I've got 3 minutes, so I got to hurry. Unfortunately,
5.
Oh, five. The first meeting, I apologize. I was out of the country. I wish I could have made it. So I didn't find out about this till noon, so I ran home. I started crunching math and doing as best I could, and I got like halfway there. I did make some progress. The numbers I came up with, though, clearly state that if you're trying to increase the tax revenue, basically by renting out these apartments, that, for example, people have access to kitchens, things like that, so they're less likely to go to the grocery store, things like that. They may bring, 25% of their food from home. They may stop at Walmart on the way here, get 25% more of their food, and only get half their amount of food from stores, Blue Mountain Foods and whatnot. As and compare that to a hotel, when someone passes through, they're going to be going out and enjoying all the local restaurants, and all of that money is going to be going towards the restaurants. And those people most likely are going to be staying here either way, so you're losing money right there in the restaurant industry, in my opinion. And I have all this in notes, like I said, and I'm probably going to be all over the place here. I'd like to just quote one thing that I pulled off the internet. This came from one of the tourism capitals of the United States down in Florida, and this is from a news company, Channel 13 News, and I just highlighted kind of the highest things. Orlando, a growing trend is making its way through the theme park capital of the world. Homeowners are advertising their homes and rooms for rent online because vacationers from all over the world Hotels are taking notice because it is taking away business. This concept is catching on and attracting the attention of the Central Florida Hotel and Lodging Association. I know this is Florida, but I think it can also apply to Utah. So we need to monitor to make sure there is an open playing field, because if more and more travelers to Orlando are not paying the tax and the sales tax, and the infrastructure that we have established would crumble. Experts predict most renters are not paying the 6% tax that benefits tourism development. Officials say they are discussing the idea of creating a task force to track down more homeowners who rent out their homes without reporting it on their taxes. So that's just one thing, and there are just loads and loads of this all over the internet. So I covered the food. How much time am I looking at? Okay, this just has so much. I'm just all over the place. So I covered the food. I mean, I think that's a no-brainer right there. That we're going to be spending less money on food, and with hotel rooms in general. I'll give you a quick example. I went ice climbing in Ouray, Colorado a little while ago. There must have been about 9 of us that rented this gorgeous cabin, and it came to like $40 a person. Although a bunch of us slept on the floors and stuff, but it was a gorgeous cabin. Now, if we had to put that into hotel rooms, a hotel, you know, that would have been, I don't know, a lot of rooms. It would have cost a lot more, but it would have benefited the city a lot more at the same time. So let's get, and I'll finish with this, some deer hunters. Some deer hunters coming to town. Say there's 14, let's say there's 14 deer hunters staying here for 7 days. That's how long they usually stay, unless they get their deer and they leave early, okay? That's about 4 rooms. I charge $89. That's $2,519.72. And room revenue, I would make 11% of that goes to transient tax, let alone all the food they're going to spend around town, okay? And I got the numbers somewhere in here. If they rented a house in comparison that I could find was right about $200 to $230 a day, which was less money. And then keep in mind they're also bringing in a lot of their own food. There's a lot more in there. I mean, I gave you notice after notice after notice, but that pretty much explains to me this is just a no-brainer. I believe every American has the right. I do believe every American has the right to rent out their house, but when it starts affecting our tax base and money coming in, I think you do kind of have to relook at the situation, you know, and anyway, that's where I'm at with the whole thing.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask him a question?
For clarity
For
only.
clarity only? So I'm just wondering about what your position is. Are you against any short-term rentals? Do you want to see all in hotels? Or would you like to see some new controls and some legalized process for doing
If they're
short-term
gonna,
rentals?
yeah, see, right now, you know, I'll be quick about this. I looked up the laws briefly. It's like if something like, what is it, 10% of money, if you're in your house like 10%, 90% of the time or more, 10% of that money is completely tax-free, and it changes for the longer you're in your house. So to answer that question, yeah, I don't think it's a very regulated industry, in my opinion. You know, that didn't really answer your question. If I had to choose one or the other, I'd like to see it gone.
No short-term rentals allowed at all?
No short-term rentals.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Maybe long-term, like for oil workers that are going to be here for 6 months, because I get tons of them at my hotel wanting $39 nights, and I can't do it. I simply can't. So maybe long-term house rentals and you're going to probably see more of the potash, the windmill people, but not the weeklies.
So greater than 30 days?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. Who else would like? Go ahead.
I'm Jason Davis. I run Blue Mountain Horsehead Inn for my parents over here. I spoke at the last meeting. I had some concerns that I brought up, but I've got some other ones I'd like to address right now or let you know about. We have at Blue Mountain Horsehead Inn 9,490 rentable rooms in a full year. In 2014, we rented out 5,177 rooms, which equates out to about 60% occupancy for the year. I am sure that these numbers would be about the same percentage-wise as the other motels and hotels in our city. I don't see how we have a shortage of rooms available for tourists visiting our wonderful area. Last season, there were only about 8 nights that I recall that there were no more rooms available in our city. At Blue Mountain Horsehead Inn, we have 3 kitchenette rooms that are available. Only about 5% of the guests that rent out those 3 rooms rented them for the ability to cook food. We rely on groups of hunters and construction workers to help us maintain our expenses throughout the slow times of the year, which is in the winter. We, as motel operators, would lose this clientele to these short-term rentals, which in return would make us struggle in the slow times and end up making some of us close down our properties, which have been a viable part of our local economy. I think that if this does go through, it should be limited to a small number of special use permits and probably be designated by a lottery system as to whom gets these permits. Also, the city would have to hire an out-of-state firm to handle this lottery because gambling is not legal in Utah. And I mean, the DNR has to hire a company in Nevada to do all the deer draws and everything. But now it becomes a problem with infringing on the rights of the neighbors of these properties. Do they want a commercial business next to their home, which they choose to live in this R1 designation? And I'm sure you guys all know the code for the city R1. The R1 residential zone has been established for the purpose of providing a place where single-family detached dwellings can be constructed, having attractively landscaped yards and a favorable environment for family life. Uses such as multiple family dwellings, apartment houses, and commercial and industrial uses are not permitted in this zone. And as far as I can see, the city of Monticello has chosen to make exceptions by, adding permitted uses, and special conditions and so on and so forth. So I'm assuming we just have to add on to one of these special conditions if they're going to go ahead with it. But I am against it. I live at the motel, which is in a commercial area. Live next to the highway. We get used to the noise and the traffic and everything like this. But people choose to live in these residential areas and be away from all that. They don't want all the noise and the traffic. They want to know who their neighbors are. And I don't think it's right for people that choose to live in those areas for, have a bunch of outsiders coming in for short-term use. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess I'll go next if that's okay. My name is Candace Davis. I am Jason Davis's wife and daughter-in-law from down there, and I've run their motel. I managed their motel for 2 years for them, the Monticello Inn, and I've helped manage the Blue Mountain Horsehead Inn for 2 years. I also in Las Vegas, we lived there, and I was in the tourist industry there quite a bit. I guess right now I'll just start that, we're not against free market, we're not against any having competition. I mean, that's just a part of life. We consistently have competition. This gentleman here is partially our competition, but we're all fair-based, we all fight fair. We all contact each other. If we need to send somebody somewhere else, I call him and say, hey,
Hey, what?
I call him, or, I call somebody, at Canyonlands Motor Inn who they can't be here tonight. But, we're pretty fair about how we deal with each other. I think these people coming in or who own the houses and things, they really haven't been a huge part of the motel industry as it is right now, so they really don't understand all the things that we have to comply with as motel, hotel, B&B owners. The homes that they're going to put in, they're not going to have any on-site managers, they're only going to be off-site managers. So the people living next to them, if they have any problems with the people who are staying in the homes, that's going to be a big concern for them, because who do they call? They have to kind of be the regulators of these homes that are next to them, and either call the police on if they're being, a distraction, or have to try to contact the homeowners, and who knows if they can get a hold of them if they're in-state or out-of-state. They're not going to be probably taxed or regulated as a motel, hotel will be. In order to do a hotel, a motel, or a B&B right now, you have to get a commercial loan. And it is going to be a larger loan. It's going to have a higher tax regulation. And your property tax is going to be a commercial property tax that we have to pay. I mean, these are all things that, you sign up for when you get a motel. When you get these properties, you understand that this is part of it. Basically, 60% of your income is going to go to taxes. And then, of course, the resale and purchases of these properties are a lot more complicated because they are commercial. If you try to get a commercial loan right now for a hotel motel, it's nearly impossible. You literally, even if you have perfect credit, will not be able to get a loan without prior access to having that type of business under your belt. I went over your papers that you guys had for this, what is this thing? The white paper. Yeah. Some of the examples you guys gave in these papers that you guys sent out to us, you know, these are talking about counties that have, Boone County has 238,000 residents in it. We don't have that much. We're nowhere near that. They get 3 million overnight visitors, and we can't compare to that right now. There's no way we're even close to that. Cannon Beach, they have actually a population that's very similar to ours that's used in this paper. And this is all from your paper that you gave us, this white paper. They have 1705 population, pretty close to ours, 4 miles wide. Okay. But they get 750,000 visitors a year. We're not even close to that. And the types of visitors that would visit a Cannon Beach, a beach property area, you know, these are not going to be the same as the types of visitors we get. Hunters, construction workers, hikers, you know, people who are not necessarily looking for, you know, the beach spa atmosphere. They're here to have fun, go out and use the outdoors and come back, relax, go and do it again the next day. It's a whole different ballgame. However, with Cannon Beach, they actually had a great idea. They put a cap of 92 homes in their area to maintain the median for everyone, so it would be fair to the hotels and the homeowners. However, you have to consider they get 750,000 visitors, and they only have 92 homes. That's a big difference. I think that kind of percentage would go a long way for us to have to try to decide how many homes we're actually going to allow to do this if we do. An average home in that area costs $778,000. So an investor that's going in there has to be pretty serious about keeping the community alive, keeping the investment real, making sure the investment that they're making is going to be a long-standing one. Because that's almost, you know, $750,000 is a lot different than $80,000, you know, for our homes that investors can come in and buy and purchase and use. The city of Santa Fe limits their rentals to 17 rental periods per calendar year. That's also an option that we may have for the ones if we choose to do this. But a lot of them that causes problems that I've looked up a lot of things online, and the main thing that I see that is causing a problem, especially in the larger cities, is rentals and long-term housing for people. Because what's going to happen is somebody on Block A is going to say, I'm going to rent my house out to tourists. It's going to be, you know, the short term. And then they're going to start making a whole bunch of money. Well, the person down the road who is renting their house long term and isn't quite making the same amount of money as this guy, and he's looking at this guy going, oh, hey, that looks pretty good to me. I want some of that money. They're going to evict the people that live there and try to make this money. So now you're talking about long-term rental and long-term residents being evicted from their home in order to provide a higher income bracket for these people who want to do this short term. So you're changing the community in sense from underground up. Not to mention that with food and different things like that, you know, a lot of the hunters and construction guys, which I think is mainly going to be the short-term visitors for these homes, even though they say it isn't. Us running a motel, we know that those type of people are going to be more interested in these type of homes. They're not going to eat out as often. They may go to the grocery store, but guess what? They stop in Walmart on the way, or they have friends that go to Cortez and get their beer and alcohol for them, so why not pick up some stuff from Walmart? You know, I mean, you've got to really consider that the restaurants in this area are already impacted on the low amount of tourists that they get as it is, especially in the winter time. Not to mention, you know, that I really don't think that a lot of these people are going to be picking up their food here. So if you think it's coming from the grocery stores here, I'm just, in my opinion, it won't. Just from talking to the tourists that we talk to that come into our area that bring their own food, they pick it up outside of town. And that's a big impact on our tax and economy, as Derek was saying. There's a lot of things that, I'm concerned about. I really just don't believe that you guys are ready to deal with, I think you're unprepared to deal with what's going to happen after the fact. Airbnb, VRBO, HomeWay, these are all programs online that allow people to rent out just rooms, not homes, but rooms online. That's something you guys are going to have to probably start regulating too, because if somebody sees that they can rent a house, well, why can't I rent a room? Are you guys going to have regulations over all that? Do you really have the infrastructure to handle what this door that you're about to open? And it's going to be a big door, and it's going to be a big flood of investors and people that are going to want to come in, because they know that our area is growing slowly, but it is growing, and they're going to want a piece of that. So for me, the question is this really best for our community in the long run? And that's it.
Thank you.
And if you didn't guess, I'm not for it.
You're not for allowing any?
Maybe in the
Or
future.
but just
In the future, and if we start getting the visitors from the Four Corners Outdoor School opening, all the different things that we have that are exciting that are going to happen in the future, and we start getting those 1 million visitors a year, yeah, let's do it. Let's share the economy. But let's not undermine the businesses that have been here for years supporting this community in hopes that we're going to bring that to us. Let's wait and see that we can support it and maintain it.
Yes.
Richard Dutcher, I'm the owner of the Monticello Inn. I just have a few questions for you. First thing, all these properties will have to be zoned commercial. You cannot do R1 on any of this stuff. 2, they're going to have to buy commercial insurance with $2 million liability. If something happens on the property, they're covered. We have to do that as hotel owners. These property owners should have to do the same. Third, they're going to get sales tax numbers and tax ID numbers from the state and each individual property? No. So, are they going to collect campgrounds and room tax? No. Are we going to guarantee they're going to pay their sales tax, like you've heard in the past? No. So I'm totally against it. And I just think this community is not growing enough to even consider anything like this. All I see is people coming in, opening up businesses, and 3 months later they move out of Monticello because they can't deal with the city, the county, or whatever it is. We've been here 10 years fighting to make a living here. And I bought a lot of property here, own a lot of property here. And to me, it's just a waste of time for the county to even consider. So I'm against any of it, any time in the future.
Okay, anybody else?
I guess I'm the next, and now I have to think what everybody else said. Yeah. and we only got back from vacation night before last.
And you are
Nancy Dutcher. I'm sorry. I don't know all of you here, so I'm sure you would know me. I apologize. We got back from vacation night before last, and had heard about this first when we were on vacation. So we were kind of annoyed because this first meeting was held in the wintertime. Well, guess what? Guess when motel owners have to take a vacation? Because we work 17 hours a day. My husband and I work 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 9 months out of the year. The other 3 months, we don't get any business. I close my motel down for 3 months because I get no business. I might get 1 room or 2 rooms a night. It's not worth my snow removal and everything else. I mean, we closed down for that reason. So that meeting was kind of held at a time when some of the owners are still gone. Nick's gone, he's out, so he couldn't come and talk about this. But I'm against it The reason I am against it is for all the reasons that they just all talked about. So let me think what I want to say that hasn't already been said. Is a business owner that moves into a small town takes a huge risk, huge. Your chances of making it in a town this small is next to nothing. And granted, when my husband and I decided we were sick of the city, we moved to Monticello. We moved here because I'm from this area, and we got a great deal on our motel. We could afford it. It was something we could do. And then we bought a second hotel to give our other kids a job, to get them out of the city, to get them here. And then we bought a restaurant to give other of our kids a job, to get them out of the city, to get them to a small town. We've invested everything we own. We have mortgaged everything we own to do that. And we work hard. We spend a lot of money on these different things that we have to pay to be in business. And I don't think people who don't have a business, they have no clue how much it takes for a business owner to stay in business. It's really hard. And Jason is right on when he says, and by the way, they are buying that motel. It's theirs. I don't make any money off of it anymore. It's their, and so they are fighting for their lives right now. Because when they're only getting 60%, that's not good. We need every bit of rental we can get. And what can I say? I just know that there's just so many things that don't make it a good thing. I understand why people want to do it. They probably have bought a second house and they haven't sold their first house. The economy is really bad in Monticello right now. There's, I don't know how many houses there's a ton. And they all would like to get their houses rented or whatever to make their payments. But it doesn't mean that they can have a business just because they have one little house. Are they going to take on all the business responsibilities that we take on? It's really just not fair. It's really not fair. That's how I look at it. What else do I want to bring up? They're probably not thinking about one big thing, bed bugs. What are they going to do if someone brings in bed bugs to their house?
You know, that's
Do you know how
actually,
expensive that is?
people,
It breaks us.
I have to
Yeah.
say, people underestimate bed bugs that have never experienced them.
Yeah.
You know, they're a lot worse than you think they are, I assure you.
Yeah.
And
Disclaimer, none of our hotels right now
No,
have
none of
bed
them.
bugs.
But we all spend a lot of money
That's a
in those
disclaimer
bed
for
bugs.
us.
just a quick question, when we're done, is there a section where I can just do like 30 seconds of comments? Just
No.
about, there isn't, okay.
No,
Okay.
this is your opportunity.
This was it, I lost it, okay, I understand.
But anyway, that was just a silly thing I brought up, but it's not a silly thing. It's a very expensive thing. And then the other thing, I think with this short-term thing is, I totally agree with what they're saying. I sold my restaurant. I came home 2 nights ago, sold the restaurant while we were out of town. I spent 2 days getting everything out of the restaurant because I had to sell it at such a huge loss to get it sold. And so I didn't get anything prepared for this meeting, but because my husband and I haven't made a dime on the restaurant in all these years. We've hired a ton of people, given our son-in-law a job, and that's all we've done. And if people start renting out houses and taking away the business we're getting at our hotel, my husband and I, we'll never be able to retire. And I've tried to sell my motel because we're tired. Can I find buyers that can get a loan? No. They have to have 40% down to take on this business venture that we've all taken on. And I am so against it. Thanks.
I hear you.
I'm making notes, just a minute.
Can I make one more comment? There's only so many nights out of the year that we all fill up. And there's not that many. Because we mostly still get most of Moab's overflow. There's a few people that have caught on that this is a quiet little town, and if I talk my guts off on the phone, I can get them to stay 2 nights. If I really work on it. It's hard to get them to Monticello because we offer them nothing. There's nothing for them here to do. And so, what was the point I'm making? I'm also old and forgetful what I was even saying. But yeah, we're getting their overflow. We get Moab's overflow. And so the few nights that we fill up, we are so thankful. And we send people to Doug wherever we can to get people's rooms. And we feel bad for them because we don't have a room for them. But does someone really want us I'm not even going to who they might end up with at the hotel, I mean, at their house
At 2 a.m. in the morning.
at 2 a.m. in the morning. And they are probably not going to work it that way if that's whatever they're doing. I know there's something behind how they're organizing this whole thing. But there's not enough business for us, these 6 hotels, to survive. If anything more comes into this town,
I
any other rooms come
really
into this
feel
town,
like
we're
we're
all
gonna start seeing
screwed.
one drop, and if one drop, I feel that way too. They've been here a long time, granted, but I think they're gonna start to drop. It's just a matter of time, unless things change. I'm convinced of it.
Okay, anybody else? Gary?
I'll go.
Go ahead, Gary.
Well, I just missed a lot of the comments that were made, but it was pretty simple. As Oliver Crane said last time, the precedents in numerous court cases in this state and surrounding states, it's just something that happens. It's a minuscule thing in comparison to the hotel business. The hotel business is a multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar industry, and these few homes that are rented out on short-term rentals is a tiny but growing thing. Obviously, as was discussed last time, we are licensed. We are licensed with the state to collect taxes. We collect the sales tax. We collect the transfer room tax. We do pay it to the state. We do have our $2 million of liability insurance. We do check for bed bugs. We have cleaning people. We're pretty confident, and everything's covered. We appreciate, the Dutchers and Jared, and we're all friends. We see each other on the street, and we're all friends, and we get along. The lodging hotel industry is obviously a very growing thing, and I'm thankful for that, because it's, I know we're all in this together, and it's just a shame, it's a crying shame that MDs can't stay open during the winter, and barely in the summer. Anything we can do to bring traffic to town, whether it's a grocery store or a tire store, or no matter what it is, anything we can do to bring people to town is a benefit to the area, and it increases the commerce. People come through town, they see the hotels, they know they're there, and they get in business. But I just wanted to say that, the 3 or 4 homes right now in all of the town homes in the Monticello city that are being used for short-term rental can't possibly be affecting the hotel business in this town, whether they're going to stay in business or not. It's such a minuscule thing. But yet, like the Dutchers said, 9 years ago, they came to town with a dream of an investment, wanting to do something. Well, the next person that has a second home should have the same privilege to do with their property the way they feel. It doesn't just because somebody comes to town and sets up business, that isn't the end. The next person has the same, rights and privileges as well. I guess I'm just here tonight. We have numerous places, Moab to Monument Valley. 3 places in the city limits of Monticello, but it's a minuscule thing. But yes, like we talked before, the license, the state tax, the sales room tax, the liability insurance, everything needs to be in place, so it's a legal entity and it's run properly. And I think there's room for everyone, especially the way tourism is growing in this area.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to add another perspective to this. I know I'm on the city council, but I'm also a resident of the town. So I'd like to, add a perspective where we've discussed the hotel industry and the tourism industry, but I also like to bring to the table that we don't overlook the residents of the town. And I guess my main concern is because I really haven't decided if I'm 100% for or against, but I guess one of my main concerns, the concern that people have brought to me as a councilman, is the concern, especially looking at an R1 rated zone, is will this have a negative impact on resale values of homes in those areas? And I don't think, and as the committee, I would hope that you don't overlook, as you're doing research and gathering information, that you don't overlook the possibilities of the negative impact on resale values of homes in R1 zones that have short-term rental houses in those zones or next to those homes. And I know that is a concern because people have brought that to me, like I say, as a councilman. And I know we discussed this in our last meeting, and I can't remember what we discussed. I don't know if we had a definitive action on whether a definitive definition on whether short-term rentals is a business, is it's defined as a business operating in an R1 zone. Is that allowed? And I can't remember if we had a definitive answer on that or not, or if we were still kind of deciding that hadn't been defined by the courts at this point. But anyway, I guess I'll just leave it at that. I don't need 5 minutes, but I would ask that as you're doing research and stuff that we not forget to look at what this might do to resale values in R1 zones. Thank you.
Scott, anything?
Well, the only thing in my mind is I don't think the city should be regulating what people can do with their property. I mean, it's their property, and it might be competition with other people. But I think we need to be real careful on how you tell somebody what they can and can't do with their property. And the property values, you know, if they're making money on it, maybe the property values will go up in those neighborhoods, not down. I mean, there's a lot of aspects you need to look at.
Okay. All right, anything else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing at 7:11, is that what that says? Okay, at 7:11. And you are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or as much of it as you want, or you may leave now, whatever your pleasure is. The next item on the agenda is for the Planning Commission to talk about short-term rentals. We've had 2 hearings now. The first hearing was attended by people who were some of the short-term rental property owners or prospective owners and some of their neighbors. And this one seems to be mostly representatives of our local motel industry, so we're getting a good cross-section of the people who are interested in peddling beds for a living. You have pointed out, we haven't heard a lot yet from John and Mary Public, the residents of the city. And I don't know if that means that they don't care to express themselves, or it's it's premature in their eyes because they don't know what the city is going to propose. I don't know. But Planning Commission, what do you think we need to do from here? George, you got any ideas?
Well, I think my feelings at this point are that we have to protect the business community's investment who are in legalized zones for motel businesses. And that the city has established an R1 residential code and all the rules and regulations, and people bought into those homes and those neighborhoods based on those covenants of the law. And for us to start changing and putting businesses in the residential section kind of goes against the rules and the regulations that have been established already. So if we're going to allow business activities in residential areas, I just think it's a slippery slope to walk on. And I don't know if there's enough data in a community like ours that can really tell us whether it's going to be a net negative or a net benefit to the community as a whole.
Tom?
I think it's going to be a tough one to figure out here. I mean, in some aspects, you can see why people want to do it, but then infringing upon their neighbors to do that, they'll be happy. I believe in business, you know, people promoting business and doing business and making their, would you say, way in the world and providing for their families. I can see where they want to do that. They don't want to lose property that they've worked for. And so they want to do that. But I see the business aspect side of it. I mean, I'm a business owner, but I'm not in that side of, you know, motel. But I can understand, you know, where they would not. I mean, the part about, can I do it underground and get away with it? Which then hurts the business community. How many people are going to go underground and just do it as silently as possible, or use websites or whatever they got to do to get by and do it anyway? How's that going to hurt the community if people don't obey the law? I'm looking at all those different ideas. I'm not saying, you know, that I'm pro or for or against one or the other, but those are the things that are going through my thoughts of how do we make it, if we're going to do it, how do we make it work for both sides and make it equitable so that it's an even playing field. It's got to be. We can't have someone averting taxes and paying fees and all those things just because they want to do this or they want to do that. And businesses, you know, are regulated by the government and city and state, and in some cases. A lot of us are under federal stuff we have to pay. And for someone just to want to pop up a business that is the same type of business but avoid some of those laws by keeping it quiet, I don't think it's fair in the business community in those aspects. But those are all the things I'm looking at and thinking about, and I've read all the stuff we've been given, and there's just a lot out there we need to talk about.
Amber?
I think it's really tricky because you want to protect businesses. You also want to protect people's property rights, you know. And there's a lot to consider, and I think that what we need to do is come up with a way to sort of balance those issues, and whether that be doing some sort of a conditional use permit, because right now, as I understand it, although in the last meeting, I think what Oliver was saying was that short-term rental would not be considered a commercial use. Is that correct? That was the precedent that's been set in the court?
That's how it stands right now, but it hasn't been litigated. That's
Right.
the question.
And so the question of whether or not your short-term rental is a business or not, I think that was still up in the air. And I think that Monticello as a city could say, well, yes, we believe that this is a commercial use, or this is a business, and set up some sort of a system where people could do it in a fair way. I think, reading the white paper with all of those examples, and I know none of them were exactly like our town, but there's not a lot of places exactly like our town.
There's not. I tried to find it, believe me. I searched everywhere.
But my thought is that, we can come up with something that is a decent middle ground. And whether that be requiring anybody who wants to do this to have some sort of a special use permit, or saying that we will have, no more than 5 in town or 10 in town or something like that, and they must be set up as a business, and they must, do those sorts of things. That would give some private owners the opportunity to do this without it being a huge impact on a neighborhood. I see that as a real scary thing. I think if we had a lot of homes in a neighborhood go to short-term rentals, it changes the character of the neighborhood. And I think that we need to protect that covenant that you were talking about, because, there's a reason why we do zoning, and there's a reason why we do planning, and protecting people's property rights is one of those reasons. So I think that there's probably some scenarios out there where we could get some middle ground that could protect our business interests, that could protect the ability of a private homeowner to do this, and still make it fair. Exactly which way we ought to go, I think we need some more discussion on that. I have a couple of ideas, but I'm not 100% sure yet.
Well, the city council has asked us to look at short-term rentals and decide if they're appropriate, where they're appropriate, and how they might be regulated. This is a typical process that the Planning Commission and the City Council engage in, where they ask us to do some work and we make a proposal to them or a recommendation to them or not, and they respond. Our job as a planning commission is to look at land use within the city, which includes occupancy questions. So it's within the purview. My comment earlier about the litigation is that as far as we know right now, the question of commercial versus non-commercial as a basis for short-term rentals has not been brought before anyone in the Utah court system. So there has been no legal clarity provided through the litigation process thus far about whether it should be considered commercial or whether it is not a commercial use. It's pretty key to where we might go, I think. There's also the question of the tax collection, which is actually not as big a deal as it might sound. The city could simply tell a prospective short-term rental owner or operator that you need to show us your tax records, show us your tax papers, show us that you're set up to collect and pay taxes. And that's a bookkeeping kind of thing with the state. But there are other issues that come to the fore in Monticello. I don't know whether any of you have been in town long enough to remember that in December of 2006, the city of Monticello was notified that it no longer qualified as a resort community and could not collect the resort occupancy tax. The failure to meet the state criteria has to do with the number of rooms that were available for rental. Whether it was motels or short-term housing or whatever it was, it boiled down to the city not having an adequate supply of these things under the state law. And so the state pulled from the city its authority to collect the resort tax. One of the questions the city council will debate, it's not the planning commission's place, but it's the city council's place, is probably going to be, would short-term rentals bump the city back over that threshold that they could then qualify for a resort community and be able to collect that tax. That's a potential revenue stream for the city. I have no idea on what magnitude, but that's another side to the tax issue that hasn't yet been brought out in the public hearings. You have a question?
I was just going to say, sales are looking up, at least for me this year. Sales are looking up quite a bit. I've booked about double the amount of tour buses I normally have. And at this point, I've got a lot more reservations than I have in the past. And the forecast for tourism, I looked it up, is looking pretty good this year. So if that helps at all, just to let you know.
Okay. Well, I'm sure if the city deemed it necessary, the state tax commission would re-examine the city. But anyway, the city was sent a letter in December of 2006 saying you can't do it anymore.
And that was, I can't remember, but that was about 400 rooms we needed or something like that, wasn't
It's
it?
200
area.
And I'm assuming that
How many?
good nights, right?
We have 200.
No, we're short.
We need 200 more.
So we were
I'm
really
like, we got
close to that
200.
before.
We got that.
Right, it's about 200, it was like 1,000 versus 1,200 and something.
No, was that room nights or was that rooms available at
I'm assuming
any
it's
one
room
time?
nights.
Because if it's room nights, they were saying that we were above that again.
It's rooms available, and they have a system of counting that, because like,
Yeah, it's a formula.
sometimes like a room that has 2 beds is 2 and not 1. RV parks are 1 per site. They have a different
So
formula
do you
to
think
come up
that
with that
count
number.
included the RV parks too?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
RV pads is what they count.
Okay.
The letter is actually very non-specific.
Yeah.
It quotes the
Yeah.
regulation rather than providing an analysis of whatever data the city may have provided. So I'm in the dark about the details on that, but just so that you know, that's one of the things that the city will ultimately be considering, maybe not the planning commission, but the city council might.
Can I ask a question on
Sure.
that? And I was here when that happened, so I'm very familiar with that, not as much as you may be. So can I ask, okay, based on how many rooms they're short, do they base that on how many nights they rented out of a year? Or does it just have to be 5 more rooms and they can rent it once that year? Or is there a limit for how many nights that room has to be rented to be able to get that
I don't
that
know.
money?
From the letter that the city's provided us a copy of, I
Says-
can't tell you
It
that.
says transit room capability.
Yeah, I know that the sales tax division in the state has a number of formulas and tables and things like that that they use, but I have no idea which pieces of data they're considering or how they do their ultimate counting. I don't know.
And I think it might have a per capita component to it, so that
Yeah.
it's
Population
the number
goes
of
down.
rooms for population, so that's what defines, I think that is kind of what goes into what defines a resort community versus it. I mean, you can have a large city with more rooms than we have, but it's still,
Not a resort town.
So that changes if our population goes up or down,
Yeah,
is that
so
what you're
it's,
saying?
so it's
Oh,
not
okay.
totally based on the rooms, as far as I understand it. So I just thought I'd kind of throw that out, that I think it,
It was in that stuff I read, it had population. If the population goes down, the number of rooms you have to have go down. If the population goes up, that number goes up.
And Monticello's population has been fluctuating almost every year, so
Yeah,
it's a
count-
moving target.
I think in 2006 they had us as 19 was it 1907 or something like
Yeah.
that?
So if we submitted our vacant homes right now, then we would,
Yeah.
because rooms go up, population goes down.
Jerry?
Yeah.
Can we discuss this a number of times? Can we get a copy of the analysis requirement and count rooms and see how many?
I'm sure that it's on a website somewhere. Well, I shouldn't say that. The tax commission is very
They're
close.
secretive about stuff.
Yeah, they are. And the city can't always get, because Monticello is so small, and its lodging properties are such a tiny piece of the picture in southeast Utah, the tax commission is reluctant to provide property-specific information. And so what you get is sometimes only countywide figures. And sometimes they'll give you figures by post office service area. And so because Monticello is small from a statistics standpoint, and the tax commission is obligated to protect the confidentiality of the businesses, they sometimes can't provide the city with very much specificity. And that's just something that we have to live with. And maybe it's a good thing, because I don't really think I want to know how much each of you in your properties are making and how much of it you're paid out. That's really way more data than I need.
Oh,
But
I can give you that. I'll
Say
give
that.
a page right
yeah. But I think it does kind of make it difficult for the city, because we are small, our population fluctuates, so the calculations fluctuate, and I don't know whether they look at it in a decadal unit or a 5-year unit or whatever it may be. So I don't think the Planning Commission will make any recommendations based on the elusive attainment of the restoration of the resort tax. I think we like data a little bit more than we like magic. But the city council will probably consider it, because of course they have to consider income streams for the city. That's part of what they need to do. So we have kind of tentatively reached the idea that the short-term room rentals is applicable to a single-family dwelling type of structure, not to outbuildings. In other words, you can't convert your garage. We have come up with what's pretty much a statewide standard for the definition of short-term. It's less than 30 days. Much more than that we haven't really debated. But as you might gather from looking at that white paper that you referenced, it's all over the board. And we got more information from Oliver before he resigned, from some other communities that have defined it one way or another. So there's a lot of room here for the Planning Commission to look at whether or not STRs are suited for Monticello, just from the simple standpoint of trying to define what it is and where it should go. And the basic question that you all have zeroed in on, and which also came up in the previous public hearing as well as the Planning Commission discussions, is whether or not it will change the character of our residential neighborhoods, and whether that change will be negative and undesirable. So those are the kinds of things that we will be having to discuss. You're not going to hear us make a decision tonight. It's just too complicated. But I really appreciate you coming in and sharing with us your perspectives. It's what we wanted. we'd like to hear from as many different people about this as possible, because it does have the potential to change many things about the community. And maybe some of them will be good and maybe some of them will be negative. So I really appreciate you coming out this evening and sharing with us how you see it and how it might affect the local motel industry. And Jerry's got a property management business that has some STRs, so he actually has some first-hand experience that he's been sharing with us, and we appreciate that too. But Planning Commission, where do you want to go from here? What's the next step?
I think we need to decide for sure if we're going to say that we recommend the city treat this as a business and whether or not we think it ought to be allowed. And then if we are going to say this is a business and we want it to be allowed in some way, where do we want it to be allowed? And then if we do, what limitations do we want to put on it? I'm not sure if we should do that sort of one step at a time, or if we should come up with some proposals to discuss, or how you'd like to handle that, Lee.
George, you kind of had an idea on how to approach this. You want to expand on that?
Well, I can. To me, there was only two options for us to consider this. One being a business license under the business license aspect of the city, and the other would be to modify the lodging ordinance to permit this in R1. It's the only, or to modify R1 to allow this. So it's either an ordinance in our zoning code that we have to alter, or maybe it can be handled, since it is short-term, as a business license. Because we're allowing other home occupation businesses in the residential sector at this point in time. And there doesn't seem to be too much restriction on what kind of business can go into the home.
Now, isn't the difference here that we don't have an on-site person with that business, and so it's only allowed in the residential area if the business owner lives in the home?
No.
Well, that's, I think, what the court debates
Well,
we've been hearing about is that.
I can answer that for you.
Do you want to answer your question?
well, I was deferring to you. It's your meeting.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I'd like to hear it.
Well, the court cases that have been there say that if you're on site as a manager or an owner, then it's not more like a B&B and it is a business. If you're not on site and you're just letting somebody stay in your house for your 6 or 8, 10 days a month, and it's just a short-term rental, it doesn't fall under that business.
And I think that's where Oliver was getting at, where he'd say it's non-commercial use. But, and our discussion last time was what is allowed in, for example, in the R1, you are allowed to have a home-based business, but you have to actually live in that home. You couldn't, my question, I was asking about it because I wanted to clarify it. So my example was, okay, so I bought a home, I opened a boutique in the basement, that's allowed. But if I move out of that home, that boutique can't stay in the residential area.
Technically.
Yeah. So I guess the question is are we going to recommend that the city say that a short-term rental is a business? And if they do decide that it is a business, they need a business license. And then the secondary to that is, would that business be allowed in that residential home, in the residential area, without a conditional use permit?
Well, plus, you could have the homeowner staying there and renting out rooms,
Yes, you could.
or not being there, or being next door in another house and renting out the house next door to them. So you get all these different conditions.
Tom?
It's just a lot to think about. I don't want to see neighborhoods get messed up. You know, property values go down. I don't want to see businesses lose income, or I don't want to see the city losing their tax revenue. Anything that we'd recommend. But I believe there's probably all the things that was brought up by, I forget your first name.
Me?
Yeah.
Amber.
Amber.
I know I'm new.
Okay, but Amber brought up about what, 4 or 5 points, or the 5 points I've thought about. There's a way to, I mean, just read some of these things like Murray's and Utah and Park City, and they're all different. I mean, there's so much variety. But one point is that the biggest concerns was neighborhood impact, traffic, safety, all that kind of stuff. It does refer in Murray City that less than 30-day rentals had higher complaints in the neighborhoods for those properties. And that could be just, you got a person who takes care of everything and doesn't have complaints, and then you got B person who doesn't care. You know, he just says, "Well, I'm just interested in trying to make a buck. I don't care what happens. I don't care how many complaints that happen. I just want to make some money here." And so they don't really care about that neighborhood because they don't live there. So I have concerns about that, and as a business person myself, I have concerns about businesses being hurt in some way by not having a level playing field between the two entities.
You know, one option we haven't talked about, and this is secondary to what I already brought up, but you know, there's also the possibility that we could say, if you're not, you know, if you don't live in the community, or if you're not actively involved in that property management, that you have to have somebody in the community to do that, whether it be a third-party business, or someone you hire to manage it, or somebody that is local that can respond to complaints and that sort of thing, as a condition to the business license.
There was something I read about that. They had, where the one city had to have a posted on the outside of the house, the contact information.
Yeah, like
I mean,
and
that
like
way the
in a
neighbor-
yard or something, so
yeah.
the neighbor could call.
Somewhere
It
that
was.
says, if you have a complaint about our rental, call this number.
Yeah, one of the
I thought that was
One of the
unique for that.
city codes that we looked at require, as a part of the permit or license, that a person is personally going to answer the phone 24/7 if there's a problem or a complaint, and will be at the property to address whatever the issue is within an hour. And that is kind of interesting, because it goes back to something that was in that white paper about parties and loud noises and talking on the back porch and that kind of thing.
And if I might add, because we've run motels, we know how this goes. Hunters starting their vehicles at 4 a.m. in the morning, diesel engines running, waking up babies next door. There's all kinds of things that normal people are not used to dealing with in this kind of a scenario that is going to be thrown into neighborhoods. ATVs, more ATVs, I should say, going down Mountain Road, especially if there's houses down there. I mean, there's so many things that we put up with on a daily basis from our lovely customers that we have to deal with. That an hour, that's a long time.
There's, you
That's a
know,
long time.
there's a lot of
Respond
benefits.
faster than an hour.
I have to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning if that doorbell rings, but there's not gonna be somebody there at 3 AM in the morning if somebody has a party till 3 AM.
And she has gone out in the parking lot and
And
told people, look, there's other people sleeping here.
I'm the regulator.
The enforcement.
I'm the enforcer.
Boy.
It's scary sight seeing me in my PJs at 3 AM in the morning.
Would you allow me to make one small comment?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you said.
What was that, Nancy? It was Monty, not me. My phone's not smart.
Some ghost.
I'm not sure what you said.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was perfect.
The other thing that comes
That was
up
pretty
is the
random.
question of whether or not the city should place a limit on the number of people who can sleep in a bedroom, or the number of bedrooms that
Rural
can.
development already
No,
puts
that's-
regulation on homes that are in this area
Isn't
for
that,
that.
isn't that a federal law?
It's a fire
It's-
thing, I believe.
Yeah,
There's
fire,
fire, federal,
it's
there's already a
also-
law on that, and I think it's 6 per room, isn't it? As long as there's a rollaway. Am I wrong?
I thought it was 2 per room
Two
and
per
2 up in like the
Oh, no.
living room area if there's like a sofa or some kind of.
No, if you have two queens, it's 2 per bed, 2 per bed,
And
which
then
is 4,
in
and then a
business,
rollaway,
not
which
in
is
that
5.
whole
That's what I was
section.
always led to believe. In fact, I hope it is, because on all my doors, it's 6 is the max. We have 5 is the
For a
max
commercial
limit.
property.
6 is illegal. And I hope I'm right on that.
But not for, if you don't consider that a commercial property, then a regular
Oh, are we talking
home
about?
would be 2 per
residence.
person.
Oh, we're talking about residential?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and I
I'm
think
falling
with
asleep.
But it's
residential,
still,
you-
still.
you-
I'm like in and out. I'm sorry.
Well, I think
You've got
that's
your
something
remote
we'll
as
probably have to ask.
From what I
for.
understood, it was all about the sewer system and how many people in the home can use that sewer system without it becoming a problem. And so 2 per room is what I understood.
Yeah, there were some different things in these.
Yeah, it
things
varies,
we had
but,
here. It was
but
2 adults and 2 children that were related in the same room.
Yeah, the Super Bowl completely backed up at halftime. Or the Super Bowl, the sewer backed up at halftime during the Super Bowl. But,
Was that Katy Perry or?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. I'll be quiet.
what these papers have done is to focus us on some basic issues that appear to be common to all of these communities that have some sort of short-term rental regulation. And that's whether or not it's commercial, considered a commercial business. How to make sure that the city, the police, and the neighbors know who can be contacted and how to reach that person so that there's a real human there and not an answering machine to respond to any incidents. The number of persons per room, and in some communities, the number of rooms per dwelling that can be, that would be defined as bedrooms. And the really big one is whether or not to allow it in the R1 zone. Monticello has 2 residential zones. One is single-family dwelling only, and the other one is R2, which can have multiple dwelling units, like duplexes or apartment buildings or something like that. And then there are a few other kinds of zoning where something like short-term rentals could be considered at the planning level if a subdivision were to come in. Those seem to be the 4 key issues that all of the other communities are addressing. None of them have felt very concerned about the collection of the appropriate taxes or the paying of those taxes to the tax collection entity, because each of the communities make that a mandatory requirement through whatever permitting process they have come up with. And it would appear to me in my reading of these other ordinances that they are expecting short-term rental properties to pay the very same taxes as a motel does. So if a motel pays TRT, the short-term lodging has to pay TRT, transient room tax. And, whatever else there may be at the state, county, or local level.
But the property taxes and things and the home taxes will not be a commercial tax, it'll be a residential tax.
Well, that's an interesting question, and we have not had a discussion yet. That's part of the homework we haven't yet been able to follow through on. We haven't yet had a discussion with the assessor's office to determine whether that's going to make a difference with the rules they have to follow in assigning property values. And we haven't had an opportunity to talk with either the assessor or the building inspector on whether there are conditions for placing a number of people in a bedroom. And those conditions could be numbers of bodies, it could be fire escape capabilities, whatever that may be. We haven't yet gone down that road. We know we have to, but we've been more concerned at this point in gathering information from the residents and the business people in town. So we have some homework that we need to do, and we haven't yet done that.
One of the things I thought was interesting about Cottonwood Heights is that they had a minimum duration, which alleviated some problems, I believe, with residences not having somebody different every night.
Right.
So they have a 3-day minimum.
That's right, they did, didn't they?
And
Yeah,
I've stayed
I'd
in
mark that
short-term
on
rentals where you had a week minimum.
That way, if somebody was there 3 days, your neighbors around you kind of know you the first day and get to know you better the second day.
And
What
you
if
Instead of
they don't
somebody
like
new every day.
Um,
Of course, if we can make it mandatory they stay 3 days, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's a city law, sorry. Gotta charge you for that.
They have that in there, I had marked that.
So it's one of the options we can do in the definition.
You have to consider a pedophile situation.
I just have an administrative
Well, that's where the safety
or
concerns came in.
perspective, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So, one thing I'm trying to understand, well, there's two sides. One is permitting and then enforcement. So we've talked a lot about enforcement, but the permitting actually allows somebody the path forward to do it appropriately, and we haven't talked about a homeowner who wants to do this upfront as legally as possible. And so the permitting provides that person with those conditions or that path forward. So if you take out the R1 and you talk about commercial, because there's a lot of residents, there's homes in just the commercial side. If somebody wants to do this in a commercial zone, then how do they go about doing that with the city? So there's a permitting thing that's kind of...
Yeah, I don't remember if it was in here on the permitting, but
absent.
I did some research on some other cities. One of them had the permit and they had checkoffs, and every year they had to show that they had insurance. They had to show that they had all the legal requirements of ordinances and like fire and all those things that apply to them in their community. That all had to be checked every year to make sure that they had it, that they had a sales tax number, they had whatever tax numbers they had to have.
So the permitting helps the enforcement. That was kind of
Enforcement.
my
I thought that
point,
was pretty
is
good.
there's no way to enforce something that doesn't technically
Exist.
exist. And so like a lot of the home businesses, that example is that process makes the city aware of who they are, what activities going on, and then all of those conditions. But
Provided their documentation, then they don't get a permit until
Yeah.
they do.
So like in the commercial zone, if I'm a resident and the town has grown up around me and now I find myself rezoned or, impacted by business, now I want to use my home as a business, I don't think we've given them the tools they need to do that.
They wouldn't be able to meet the building code for a conversion from a house to a motel.
Well, so the definition comes in.
Right, because they have all these fire codes to adhere to, exiting, stairwells, hallway widths, you know, smoke detectors, fire alarm system, maybe sprinkler. I mean, there's just all kinds of regulations once you define yourself as a commercial entity. And since you're in a commercial zone, you could do that, but you then have to follow all the commercial rules to get a permit.
On the other hand, if the city chooses to define short-term rental as non-commercial,
Right.
then the default position in Monticello is if you have a single-family dwelling used as a residence within a commercial zone, you have to follow the R1 rules for that property.
Okay, in that area. So that helps. So I'm just trying to understand what,
R1 or R2, depending on the
like,
zone.
how we implement the, or follow through, because you already know that it's very difficult to regulate or enforce a lot of these things. In the city examples that you have, you know, I'm imagining code enforcement officers in a little car, you know, buzzing around and checking.
Yeah, I thought the checkoff system annually was pretty good because they have to show that they got their tax numbers current and they got to show they have current insurance.
Or something that could be accomplished by going through a property management
Yeah, like
that
assuming
has
Jerry
met all
has
of
all
those.
that stuff. And
Right,
if
so
he
that-
was permitting, he'd bring in his insurance, his tax number, his, you know, different permits, whatever he needed
Okay.
to
So
show.
anyway, that's just my comment. Is on one side there is the purpose for permitting,
Yeah, that's important, I think.
and then it helps also on the other side. But I think it does come down to the definition.
Do you want us to make some proposals this meeting, or do you want us to just continue to discuss some different options?
Well, since we have a number of other items on our agenda this evening that are likely to be equally involved, and we still have some homework to do with questions about building inspections and things like that, my recommendation is to carry this over until the next month and put it on the agenda as a discussion/action item, and as homework to rough out something about these key factors that we've been discussing, the whether or not it's commercial, the question of contact and availability.
Can we take a consensus maybe first to see if the group wants to not allow it at all?
Okay.
And just get that off the table as an option or
Not allow it
in R1?
in R1, okay. What do you think? Should it be in R1?
I think there's a way to work it.
Now, are you saying not at all, or it would have to be on a case-by-case basis?
Not at all.
Not at all, so
Because
no
if
special
we-
use permit,
If we say
someone
that we're
decides.
gonna allow it anyway, then we have to come up with all these rules and regulations and in order to take that to city council.
So, short-term rentals in the R1 zone, yes or no?
Are we doing a motion for that, or is how?
No, this is just a
Consensus.
straw
Con-
poll.
Congestion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if all of us are not for it, it's a dead issue,
Mhm.
right?
How binding is this?
It's not.
This is just a tool to give us some sense of where we need to go.
Right.
What do you think, George?
Menses tell me to not allow it.
I have trouble making it fit into the current definition or intent of an R1 zone. I don't think it's compatible as it currently stands. Having said that, I think it's also possible to find some way to try it out. But it's a tough fit in the way the city's defined R1.
And that's where I am. I think the way it's defined right now, it shouldn't be allowed. But that doesn't mean that, I don't think that there could be situations where it might work. And so that's why I asked about, you know, if there were someone who wanted to do it and they were in an R1, if we had some sort of a contingency plan where we might have some guidance. And I don't know if that would be through like a variance hearing or something like that. But I think the way it's written right now is pretty clear that it doesn't fit the intent of the R1 zone. So You know, if we don't want to change R1, if we don't want to go there, then I think that that's where we start. We say, okay, not in R1, let's talk about the rest of the town. And so that's where I stand on that. Tom?
Well, I kind of fit in with us. I mean, if we want to go down the road of seeing if we can make it feasible and is it possible to make it work so it's equitable for everyone, I'm okay going that road. But like you said, the R1 intent is residential for single families to live. And do we want to change that?
And you'll recall at the previous hearing, one of the citizens recommended that the city rethink entirely its R1 and R2 zoning. We have so many exceptions right now, if I remember his comments correctly, that the definition doesn't even seem as applicable as it did in 1980 or whenever these zones were last contrived.
What I'm hearing everybody saying, though, is that the way R1 is currently written, it's just not allowed, it's not permitted. Which means that you'd have to do an ordinance change to allow it. I think.
But you wouldn't have to allow it in R2 as currently configured, because that has some different permitted things, and it has a lot more rental type situations allowed within it.
Although it's all long-term.
It is, but it's,
Well, we can still have long-term rentals in R1, can't
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anything more than 30 days?
That's
And it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison, which is part of what's uncomfortable, because zoning is land use and occupancy is not. And the land use in R1 is single-family dwelling. That's the kind of structure that's supposed to be there. That's the intent of the zone. But single families come in property owners and they come in renters. And in R2, it's single family and multiple family dwellings. And those come in owners and renters. So,
And you have good and bad in both.
yeah, never mind the quality, but you get both. So if you have a short-term rental in an R1 zone, you still have a single-family dwelling. The question is it occupied by a family?
It's not.
And Utah at one time had struggled with the definition of what constitutes a family for housing purposes. I don't know if that ever got off the back burner and came to life or not. That's another thing we probably need to check out to see whether that ever made it onto the books. But they were working at one time on a definition that eliminated nephews, nieces, cousins, and long-term special members of the realm of friends from the definition of a family. So I think we need to check on that law to see if it was ever passed. And
See, I would also have trouble though with short-term lodging in an R2, because that's not what the design of the ordinance and the land use is.
Well, R2 is residential and light commercial, correct?
Isn't it?
Well, if it's multifamily, it's an apartment building. Okay?
Yeah.
Isn't that what it's saying?
And that could be monthly rental, it could be yearly rental, depends on the contract that is written with the tenant and the landlord. But it's certainly not in the lodging component of our ordinances, which is a different classification.
yeah, our land use ordinance says nothing about rentals. It just says single and multiple family.
Right.
So I guess you could have a building that's owned by an extended family and they all live there, but That's not where we are. Let's see if we can find the internet here.
He has it already, if you want him to read it.
Which got R2?
Jason has
No,
it.
I've got, not R2, I've got R1, but
Yeah.
10-6-1 regulations, which was ordinance in 2012, included the use.
It says you don't have your internet up and running tonight, kids.
But it says the use, location, height,
I'm on
and
it.
size of buildings and
Have
structures.
you got it on?
I'm trying to save money. I'll check my list. It should be.
It's on.
If you can get on
I'm
the
on it.
internet, go to the city code and look for the intent of R2.
Yeah, where to?
Yeah, right there.
The R2 zone has been established for the purpose of providing a place where single, two, and multiple family dwellings can be constructed. The zone permits all of the R1 uses, multiple family dwellings, townhouses, and condominiums, rest homes, daycare centers when approved by the city council. So it's not quite the same thing, but
It's not considered a commercial zone, it's a residential.
it's a residential
Still
zone.
residential.
Whereas
And-
lodging is.
But it allows
commercial.
some commercial entities, like a
Daycare.
rest home, daycare.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
Well,
that's
so does
places
R1.
that provide
Considered
residence.
accessory to residential neighborhood. It's housing.
so we need to, I think we need to put this to bed for the night and
Right.
give ourselves some homework about some of these basics. Let's make an assumption that the city council is going to want to do this in some way, shape, or form. And so respond to that by coming to the next planning commission meeting with your argument for why these are commercial or not commercial properties.
Why don't we put out a list of the things that you want us to address, I guess?
Well, because it has to go in the minutes.
Probably not.
You
Uh,
might consider it part
commercial
of
or
our
non-commercial?
Working progress?
Well, we're trying to make the minutes more useful so we can use them as a reference and go back through them. You know how we've been shot ourselves in the foot more than once. So whether or not, your argument for whether or not it is commercial or not commercial, how you want to address the question of number of people per room, in other words, the occupancy limits on the dwelling. If we assume that it's 30 day, if it's less than 30 days, do we want to put a minimum on it? And your points pro and con for whether or not it should be allowed in either of our residential zones.
Okay, so we're assuming yes in any zone except for R1 and R2, and then you're asking for discussion
Well,
on our residential zones.
yeah, this is just a place to get us
Right,
focused to start something here. And
Why would we have two regulations? If we're gonna allow short-term lodging, it shouldn't matter where it is.
Yeah.
If the house is in commercial, it's in industrial, it's in any other zone, it shouldn't matter.
well, it should and it shouldn't, because if you're in another zone and you're using the property as a single-family dwelling, it has to follow the R1 or the R2.
That's what I'm saying, it doesn't matter where the
Oh,
house is.
I see. Well,
The
it's
rules
gonna,
should be
it
the
matters
same.
to the city council, so I think we need to be able to prepare a discussion specific to the residential zone.
Yeah, I think it should just be focused on the R1.
Okay.
Because I think whatever rules you come up with, it has to apply to R1, R2, no matter where the home is and whatever zoning district it's in. And they're gonna use it for short-term lodging. The rules should be the same. Otherwise, it's gonna get way too confusing for administration.
So you're just saying pro or con on allowing it at all?
Well, I think if we're going through the exercise, we've already said, city council wants some rules on how to allow it. So we're taking off the table that we're saying it's not allowed. We already basically have a philosophical discussion that it shouldn't be in R1. But to satisfy city council, they want us to come up with some ideas.
How to make it possibly.
How to make it possible. I mean, that's what they're
Possible, yeah.
saying.
Well, can we just say if they already made up their mind
Yeah.
on what they're doing, and so we came here for nothing?
No.
No.
Okay. I
What,
just
the
wondered.
process is they don't know what to do. They're not sure what's gonna happen, but there's an interest in the community in addressing this issue. So the city council charges us with addressing it. And we do back and forth like you've heard tonight, and some of it's philosophical, some of it's more pragmatic. And we will probably at some point in the future have a work meeting with the city council. They can benefit from these discussions and we can benefit from their thinking. And we may make a recommendation to the city council. And I don't know that the city council is under no obligation to take the recommendation as written and either can it or fly it. They can come up with their own thing. They can remand it back to us and say, we don't like these parts, do it again. And it goes back and forth like that. And in the case of some ordinances, it goes back and forth for a matter of months. And finally, someone will say, we like it, we'll live with it, or this is trash. Why did we waste our time on it, and move on? So no, you've not wasted your time. It's just part of the ordinance-making process that it goes back and forth. We can't make decisions as a planning commission. We can only gather information, do the analysis, take our best cut at what might be appropriate for Monticello, and then go to the city council and share with them what we have come up with. And that could be less formally in a work meeting, or it could be formally as a draft ordinance. We've done it both ways.
Okay, thank you.
I know it gets frustrating. Democracy is messy.
Basically, the city council wants to know, is this possible? Do we think that we can put something together that's possible?
Yeah.
If not, it's
And
done.
and they'll look at things that we probably won't see, because in essence, the planning commission interacts with a different piece of the public than the city council does. And so we don't very often have the same faces in our audiences. And so, you know, it just goes back and forth, and it's just part of the process. It's messy, it's not quick, and it can be very frustrating, but the end product is a decision that something fits or doesn't fit the city. And it may be that not everybody gets everything they want. It may be that the city council doesn't like something we recommend, but they like some of this other stuff. And they may remand it to us and say, fix this, and we'll talk about it, and we'll say, no, we had it right the first time, we're not changing it. You want to change it, you write the ordinance. That's happened. But it's just part of the way that ordinances are crafted. All right. Are we clear on that? Do you have enough notes to make sense?
For what you're bringing next time?
So each of us is to do this.
Yep, that's our homework.
Do you want us to email it to you ahead of time?
That was
I think we could pass it around ahead of time. We won't be able to take any action out of it. At least we can think about what's been offered. Okay. The next item on our agenda. What?
Use the restroom and get.
Go ahead. I'm going to keep going.
Okay,
Are you going to be taking Oliver's on board?
So do you want them to email this stuff to you?
I'm not
or
done.